Welcome to yet another episode of Drew's Sports Crew here on this Tuesday night. Myself, Drew Skybrick, here back on NBA Eve for the Bucks. Right? I mean, we have NBA opening tip-off, opening night here on Tuesday night, and we have the Bucks first game now 1 day away. Comes at a great time. We're healing a little bit from the Brewers' loss now from a few weeks back. We don't have to worry about seeing the Mets in the World Series. We can just move on here, and we can just focus now on basketball, the next sport. Hopefully, though, this time not disappoint us. While we have our beloved Packers in full swing too, we'll touch on kind of how that game went this past week against Houston. And wow, it was a fun game indeed. Ended the way the Packers wanted it to, so that especially helped out. Win or lose that game, it was just a great game by both teams nonetheless. Good competitive matchup, which is always refreshing to see. So, looking at it, we'll touch on both of those games, and then talking scheduling here. Jordan Million tomorrow night. We'll see timeline. Looking at 6 p.m. Central on that roughly. Otherwise, content, check it out at Drew Sports Crew. You can check out Power Rankings, NBA, NFL. NBA ones debut tomorrow. Check those out. New NFL rankings came out today. So I would go see those. A lot of NFC North. 3 of the top 4 teams are, in fact, of the NFC North. Chiefs are number 1. Look, I got some feedback on that. The reality is the NFC North squads, even with how Baltimore has performed, these squads have been the most consistent, right? When I'm talking Detroit, Minnesota, and Green Bay. Sure, Green Bay had its share. I kind of look at that first game for them. Really hard to wait considering how that game shaked out. Neutral site, it just was weird conditions overall. Where I'm really going with this is how fluky was that Vikings game at home. That game just felt very fluky. Not that Minnesota shouldn't have won that game, but the score it was, how many points they put up, some of Love's mistakes, just felt a weird game. I don't know. That's kind of my take on kind of why the Packers are ranked where they're. Detroit and Minnesota, though, flat out are phenomenal. They played a close game. It's not like, hey, the Ravens did lose to the Raiders. That did happen. So they can't be ahead of them, at least at this point, I feel, regardless of how great last night's win was for them. And hopefully all is well with Chris Godwin. But just your take on the Packers, where they rank in the NFL. Have them top 4, have them at 4. Minnesota, obviously, with the head-to-head, got to put them ahead of them. And then Detroit, too. Detroit beat Minnesota, and we haven't faced Detroit yet. Just works out that way. But yeah, having then KC number 1, undefeated, only undefeated team, regardless of, you see 6-0 at the end of the day. That's what matters. But my eyes tell me they might not be the best team in football, but they certainly still can win games and just can close games. And what I mean by that is, Mahomes hasn't been at that same level and so on. So that's you can go see that at your sports crew. That's your talk on that. Let's go into the world of football. We'll continue there, talking through the Packers a little bit more here, and then we'll pivot over to the NBA. So yeah, this Packers game was a win that you hoped for and you got it. I kind of broke down the schedule, like where the Packers sit, looking at kind of what you want from them. This was one of those games where we circled at the start of the year on Jordan Million, and we said the Packers, if they lose this one, you're not surprised. You might even expect them to lose this one just because it's a tough one. It's one of those toss-ups, and it sure was. Texans came out right away with momentum after the interception. They go up 3-0. Right. I mean, primarily 30 points scored in the second quarter combined. That was really most of the scoring output in this game. It won't touch on, we know the end result. We know what happened. McManus delivers and is very effective. I think the big thing was, we talked about Nico Collins being out for this team and just is a phenomenal receiver, one of the top receivers in terms of creating separation in the NFL. And CJ Stroud, just without him, has looked lost. 10 for 21, 86 yards. He only had 86 yards. It's the lowest amount in his career for a start. Didn't even complete half his passes. Look, I think the big thing for this Jeff Hafley defense has been locking down QBs and preventing them from having the big plays. We've relatively seen that this year, I'd say. I think it's been a very, very improved defense with that, and also then just racking up the turnovers. We still see thinness in the run game, but with what they're seeding in the run game, they're allowing it really to not take up the whole drives. I mean, they're having long drives against them, certainly with having other teams run the ball. You can see some of these long 7-8 minute drives, but it's really not hindering the Packers in terms of they've been able to still get that turnover and still force them into third downs, and they're really, that's been really important as allowing for teams not to convert those third downs and holding them to a field goal, as we saw with that interception to start the game, or just getting that turnover in the end zone. It's been really refreshing to see from this defense still. Joe Mixon was what I was mentioning on the ground, 25 for 115, 4.6 yards per carry. Looked great. He hasn't lost a stride yet, it seems. Jordan Love with his Brett Favre-esque skyline or stat line there. 24 33, 3 touchdowns, 2 picks. Look, with Love this year, we know the picks they've been up there. A lot of forces, you'd say. Some aren't necessarily having his fault, but I feel like you can say that for every quarterback with interceptions. There's that luck component too, but we still have seen that force. We're seeing some forces with Love into double coverage, sometimes triple coverage. He likes to be aggressive, and I really respect that. I think that's something we need. You got to have a guy who's willing to take those shots downfield, and he's doing that while maintaining right. I mean, 73% completion percentage. You'll take that for the shots he was taking downfield. Only missing 9 attempts. Obviously, 2 picks in there. That's got to be cleaned up. And moving forward, just trying to limit those interceptions. But otherwise, I think the shots he was taking, you might say at the end of the game when the Packers had that field goal locked up, he took a shot for the end zone. I think it was to Wicks, things like that, or maybe some head scratchers, but they got the game. They took care of business, and that's what matters. Josh Jacobs, again, 12 of 76. Look, they did well. They didn't have to run the ball a whole lot. They didn't have a whole lot of plays. So, reality, they ran another 60 plays. Just kind of what you put as a benchmark, if you will. Looked okay. Jacobs did his job. Not a whole lot from Emmanuel Wilson today. Was one of my notes on that. I think the target share, right? I mean, kind of how we saw this game turn out. Romeo Doubs primarily dominated in this one. They really took away Jayden Reed. I think that was something, Jayden Reed rushing yards, unfortunately, was not the play this week. I also wasn't able to bet it, as the books no longer offer the Jayden Reed rushing yards. I think that's a bet that many of us like to take because the Packers will run that play, that sweep play, at least once a game, it seems. But no, really, Houston took away Reed throughout this game, which Reed being the most explosive Packers receiver makes sense. That's where you've seen Romeo Doubs, 8 for 94 in this one. I think with Doubs, the big thing is even being Mr. Consistency, but the idea of Doubs just being that middle receiver who's not going to get that same separation as guys like Wicks or Reed or even Watson, if you will, but is going to run the route smooth enough and make, do enough to get the play done. So I think that's kind of with Doubs what we've seen and what we'll continue to see. So I think he's going to be viable in terms of fantasy, just as even in that terms, like he could still be a viable flex pending matchup. And put together another nice showing. I think with Jacobs in the passing game was big, 5 receptions, 16 yards, and he had that touchdown, finally receiving touchdown. But seeing Jacobs as a pass catcher was something we're waiting on, and we sure saw it and didn't do a lot with it, but still was intriguing to see. Um, on the defense side, Quay Walker left without a concussion. We'll know more about his practice status on Wednesday, so tomorrow, or if you're listening today, hopefully we'll know more then. Um, Xavier McKinney, of course, with that big sack too, with the defense. But it's gonna be intriguing to see kind of with Walker though, because we saw McDuffie get in there, we saw Cooper get in there, both guys again. McDuffie's played well all year, but seeing Cooper in there, make a couple plays already was good. The defense didn't really lose a step at all. Also, shout out Evan Williams. That was another guy. Um, it's just looking at this Packers team, letting Devondre Campbell walk. It's just crazy in the NFL. I always say this, but in terms of the turnover on defense, especially with the linebackers, I'd say primarily with linebackers, and you could say some spots of the defensive line, some secondary guys, but um, the amount of turnover you can see year over year, or the amount of change, Campbell went from being an absolute stud, getting that extension. Rasul Douglas went to being that guy, and both guys are, Douglas being traded, but Campbell being just off the team and gets a deal, I believe, with San Francisco, but not the same player he was just a couple of years ago. It's just crazy the amount of, again, turnover, and um, the game just wears guys down over the years. So looking at the Williams again, my point, different year. We have some new faces and some impact guys with that. So it's been good to see. And McManus again making those kicks is big. He's got a big leg on him. He might be able to make some 50 pluses for Green Bay consistently, which is what they need. He made that 45-yard was what it was. But again, this Packers team does need that big leg when we're talking 50, 55. Obviously, with Narvison, was missing a lot of kicks, but really the big thing was missing those short ones and not being able to extend the field for the Packers. So took a shot on him. Had some good moments, had some not so great moments. Here comes Brandon McManus. We talked about through last week's episode. And then he will be playing against the Jaguars revenge game next week is McManus. Well, he's a veteran kicker, but point is they play the Jaguars, which this should be a very favorable matchup in terms of what we're seeing. It's at Jacksonville, weird spot. Jacksonville's just coming back from Europe. So we'll see how they are doing. But this game's at noon. Packers are heavy favorites in this one. It's noon again, Fox. This is one Packers should win by a couple scores, but you never know. And with these games, this should be kind of similar to the Tennessee game, like a 30-14 win. Obviously, that was a weird score with it, but my point is win by a couple scores. Obviously, getting the win is the most important part here. Jacksonville has struggled mightily this season, but we'll kind of see how they're coming out after Trevor Lawrence has played better. That team overall, I mean, again, being gone for the last 2 weeks, having 2 games in Europe is definitely a thing. But they get the win this last week against New England. So again, Lawrence is looking better. Brian Thomas is a guy. I think the receivers, the passing game is the big thing. Pending their running situation. Tank Bigsby's been the guy there. We'll see him more, but they really got to contain Brian Thomas in his passing game and in the secondary. But you could live with some of the runs. Lawrence definitely is turnover prone, so that's kind of a key to win this game too. But looking at the standings for the Packers and at this point, again, we know the record. They're 5-2, somehow in third place in the Central, or I say Central, really, baseball mode still, NFC North. Again, they're half game so back against Minnesota and Detroit. They'd still be in a playoff spot nonetheless. As Washington's 5-2, Philly's 4-2. Then we see Seattle 4-3, and then we have Atlanta and Tampa Bay both 4-3. Otherwise, all 3 and 4 are worse. I didn't mention Chicago at 4-2, right? 4-0 at home so far. That's been the big thing for Chicago. People don't talk about. They are 4-2. Obviously, they had that neutral game in there, but they already have had 4 home games. So that's something. They got a lot more road games here coming up. The Packers have been fairly even, 4 home, 3 on the road. So um, they have their 4th road game here again on Sunday. So that's what we're looking at for the Packers. Hopefully, another way to move them to 6-2 to start the year, their first 8. You'd love to see that. Let's move over here to the Bucs. Brief, as I kind of did a preview last week. We'll touch on it here before we wrap up the show. So looking right away, start the season tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Central. So Wednesday, October 23rd. That is in Philly. That game is on ESPN or, of course, on the radio. It's been interesting with the developments on Bally, kind of how you can watch these games. So I'll talk about that too. But looking at this first game here, Joel Embiid and Paul George both already ruled out for the Bucs or for the 76ers against the Bucs, which leads to hopefully it being a favorable situation for Milwaukee. You never know. You saw Boston make all those threes here on Tuesday night. So anything can happen, but he definitely liked the odds here for the Bucs in this opening game against, again, the Philadelphia 76ers. They then go Friday, first home game against the Bulls, and now it is FanDuel Sports Network, Wisconsin. So, which this is very weird. So Bally, FanDuel, big sports betting platform, or DFS, sportsbook. So they take over the network, naming rights. So that it's just like as if you were to watch Bally Sports Network or Fox Sports Wisconsin. That's kind of the same thing here. Obviously, the Brewers are off this now. That was the big change coming through. We'll know more about that, how that will for sure look next March when we see some spring training action. But right now, yeah, the Bucs are in an odd situation. They definitely should explore the same as should the NBA for what the Brewers did. I think it's going to be a huge success what the Brewers did, where MLB is going to have the broadcasting rights there. But we'll see. This is going to be probably a year thing. And again, the great staff that the Brewers have are going to stay with them. As with the Bucs here, we have the same staff as well. So that's that Friday game. And then Sunday here, we have the game against the Nets. That's going to be so refreshing to have some basketball back. It really is. Because, we had obviously the World Series going to be going on Friday starts, but being able to have another sport other than football is good because you just got to wait till Sunday to watch the games, especially with the Packers. It's been Sunday noon. They had that 3:25 in there. There's some more prime time coming up, but that's what we're looking at on that. But the Bucs injury report: Chris Middleton again out with that ankle injury. Still, his status has been interesting. I of course have that Chris Middleton is good shirt. We're hoping come through soon. It's not really looking like he's going to play at all this week. I mean, that's based on how I'm reading the situation. I was really hoping he'd be ready by opening night. Obviously, my hope is not there. Giannis is going to play. They say he's probable. He's going. But otherwise, everybody's good to go, which obviously you wish Middleton would be, but that's refreshing. Right? Giannis healthy, Dame healthy, both together. What we needed last year in the playoffs. I think the big thing in this game is going to be this first one. How are the rookies going to play? A.J. Johnson was coming off a terrible shooting game last week. How's he looking? Is he going to get some good minutes? I'm probably not going to get minutes until near the end, but how are the impact rookies and / second year guys, right? That throw in Andre Jackson Jr. How's he looking year two? What kind of minutes are we going to see for him? And then also how are the new additions going to play on the club? So that's Delon Wright, Torian Prince, Gary Trent, those three especially. I want to see game one. I want to see some impact. Shooting the ball, we expect catch and shoot for them especially, but definitely need to see some impact minutes for those guys, especially in that Malik Beasley role. Really, that's what we're going to need. We're going to need that, especially from Trent. I think that's the biggest hope with Trent, not Prince, more Gary Trent. Really want to see him make that level of impact this year. And opening night for them, let's see what we can do. So those are my big takeaways here. And then also, how are they going to play with Giannis? Because Giannis played like 20-something minutes in preseason game, didn't play much in the preseason, as we know. Played great when he was in there, but they had more catch and shoot opportunities. Definitely less threes, obviously, when Giannis was on the floor, which makes sense. It should be that case. So we know how Giannis and Dame are going to play together. We saw it last year, but the role players are a little different in terms of what they bring. Obviously, there's still that same catch and shoot aspect Beasley had, but with these guys, but there's definitely more length, definitely more willingness to drive with some of these guys. So we'll see how it performs. Night one, Andre Drummond's going to be the primary guy in the paint for Giannis and Lopez. So I say Lopez as if he's going to get much in the paint, but we'll see. That might influence their game plan. I can't imagine the Bucks shooting a lot of threes tomorrow, but kind of see on that, and looking forward to watching that game. So that's all I got here. Hoping for a great week from Bucks basketball, maybe 3-0 start. Definitely possible based on the schedule. It's pretty favorable in terms of Philly already having these injury issues day one. Hopefully all is well with them, and hopefully the Bucks can win, have an undefeated week. So that'll wrap it here for myself, Drew Skyberg, on this Tuesday night. Thank you all for listening to another episode of Drew Sports Crew, the perfect podcast for you.